Hello, my name is Bonnie Burke, and I currently work for Workforce Resource. Today's presentation is Safety in the Workplace. Safety in the Workplace is a part of our Quality Worker series, and from today's training, I really hope to share with you some experiences that I've had in my personal life, and some not quite so good, and others pretty exciting. You should have some handouts in front of you, and I encourage you to follow along with those handouts, to take notes, and to also complete a couple of small assignments that I'll talk about during the training. So the main topics that we're going to talk about is what is OSHA and why is it important to you as an employee? Oftentimes people think of OSHA as the bad four-letter word. Stay away, don't even talk about it. So hopefully I will put those fears to rest for some of you. I'm going to talk about what are some of your rights under OSHA, and they clearly define employee rights. However, as adults, not only do you have rights, you have responsibilities. So we're going to be talking about what responsibilities do you and your employers have under OSHA. And we're going to show you some slides that will give you some tools to help you identify some possible concerns or safety hazards at your work. No matter where we work, there are safety concerns. I know some people get nervous when I say the word hazard, yet that's exactly how OSHA describes them on their website. And I want you to be familiar with the OSHA website and some of the resources that are available to everyone. OSHA is a federal agency, and as a result, the resources on their website are free, and I want to be able to show you where to go on their website and how to order those. So those are the takeaways. Those are the objectives that I hope to accomplish during this workshop on safety in the workplace. Because just like every other organization, OSHA has a mission. And their mission is to save lives, prevent injuries, and to protect the health of our American workers. If you attended my Manufacturing 101 presentation, you already know that I worked in manufacturing for a number of years. You may remember that part of my job was as a safety manager. I had facilities in several different locations. I was passionate about safety. I had seen some pretty grueling injuries and heard of some as well. My worst day at work when I was responsible for safety was when I walked up to my front office door and I looked down on the ground and there was a red biohazardous bag. And in that bag were 3 fingers of one of my employees. Of course I cried. I shouldn't, right? I was the manager. This was an amazing man. And so I talked to him later on that day and I said, what happened? He is on the safety committee. He was a supervisor. He was an amazing person. Not to mention I liked him as a friend. And he said, I did what they told me to do. So, would you jump off a bridge? If they told you to jump off a bridge, what do you mean? You did what they told you to do. And he said it was a new piece of equipment. I hadn't ran it before. We were in a hurry. The order was late. The wood was wet. I opened up the hood. I reached in. I had done it several times throughout my shift. It was working well. Yet one time when I reached in, the blade was exposed and it cut off his fingers. One of my worst days ever as a safety manager. So some of the tools that I hope that you get from this presentation will increase your awareness and make you think of your rights, your responsibility, and hopefully give you some courage and knowledge about the importance of speaking up when you see something that you feel is not right or you know is unsafe. So OSHA, I'll give you a little bit of background on history. I know you're probably thinking, history, what the heck? But it started in 1970. I know I'm aging myself because I feel that's not that long ago. Back in 1970, President Richard Nixon signed it into law. Yes, OSHA is the law. It was a passage that was put into act by two congressmen by the name of William and Steger. And so they worked very, very hard to pass this as an act. OSHA covers not all employers, however, most. In the United States and also in Puerto Rico and in Washington, D.C., OSHA covers all businesses that have employees that affect commerce. What do you mean, Bonnie, right? Well, I'll give you a little bit more definition. If you were self-employed, you have no employees that work for you, you don't have to worry about the OSHA Act. If you are a farmer and you only have your immediate family members that work for you, you don't have to worry about the OSHA Act. However, the day you hire even one employee to work on your farm and they are a paid employee, then you have to comply with the OSHA standards. Also, state and local government employees do not have to comply. What's up with that, right? State and local government employees do not have to comply. They have their own set of rules. In addition to some of the OSHA things, they have their own set. So, question, true or false? Employers do not have to follow the OSHA standards. The answer is false. Like I've already said, OSHA is the law. OSHA can inspect businesses, they can impose fines. Employers are legally required to follow the OSHA standards and to protect their workers from hazards. I know I've had a lot of supervisors, employers talk to me about the legalities of OSHA. And to me, I always think safety in the workplace is so much more than OSHA. OSHA is the law, yet safety is the right thing to do, regardless if it's the law or not, to protect our employees so that at the end of the workday, we can all go home with the same 10 fingers that we punched in with, right? So it is the law. You might be asking yourself, why were these OSHA standards created? The biggest reason why was to reduce workplace injuries and illnesses. Remember, it was 1970 when the OSHA Act was passed. In 1970, there was over 14,000 work-related fatalities. In 2014, there was 4,405 fatalities, a significant reduction. However, still, on an average, there are 12 people every day that go to work and do not come home. You might be asking yourself, what are some of the causes of workplace fatalities? The number one is falls. And these are falls that happen not just in general industry, but also in construction. How many times do you drive past a construction site and there's workers on top of a roof hanging shingles with no fall protection? If that worker missteps and falls, that worker will either be seriously injured or die from that fall. The number one cause of workplace fatalities are falls. The second main cause of workplace fatalities are transportation. So you might be thinking, transportation, how is that? So it's not just semi-drivers. Thinking of the post office, thinking of courier services, thinking of people such as myself that I drive a lot for my job. So transportation, car accidents are the second main cause of work-related fatalities. The third main cause I feel is so sad. It's workplace violence. You just need to turn on the television, listen to the nightly news, and almost within any given week, you will hear of a workplace fatality due to violence. This fourth main cause, at first when I read this, I struggled with this. What do they mean? Contact with objects and equipment? that can cause a fatality? Well, when I do research and I look at the OSHA's webpage, they clearly describe those incidences where somebody was killed because of being caught by a piece of equipment or being struck by an object. So on their website that I just referenced, a nickname for it is their Fat Cat Report. Sounds kind of cute, right? But it's not. Fat Cat stands for fatality and catastrophe. On their website, it's titled Worker Fatality Reported to OSHA. A catastrophe, according to OSHA, is defined if an employee would have an amputation, a loss of an eye, or if one employee has to be hospitalized because of a workplace incident or illness. On their webpage that references the fatalities and catastrophes, you will be able to find definitions and also names, dates, and descriptions of work-related fatalities and catastrophes. Every few seconds, a new name scrolls in front of you on this website. To me, that is why I firmly believe that safety in the workplace is so critical, and if it has to be tied to OSHA, it has to be tied to OSHA, to making sure that the standards are there, the tools are there to help employers provide that safe work environment. And there's this video that I love to show people, yet today I think I might pass over it, because the video talks about people who were killed in the workplace, and some of it is a little graphic. So because this presentation is pre-recorded, and I usually say you can leave the room if you would like to, we're going to skip over that piece today. However, one of the tools that I want you to learn and think about today is when we talk about the fatalities and talk about the injuries, what was the employee's responsibility and what was the employer's responsibility? They have to work together to provide a safe work environment. So my question to you is, why do some employees see something that's unsafe and they choose not to speak up? Has that ever happened to you? As a new employee, if you see something, statistics will say that you will not talk to your employer about it, especially as a new employee. You may not want to be a boat rocker, which actually was my nickname in my job in manufacturing. My name was Bonnie the Boat Rocker. If I found something that gave me concern, I would go to my supervisor and he'd see me coming. He'd say, "So what now, boat rocker?" Not a good reputation to have. However, I went home every day with my 10 fingers in place. And so people oftentimes, especially if you're new, are afraid to speak up. However, OSHA says that workers may bring up safety and health concerns in the workplace to their employers without fear of discharge or discrimination, as long as the complaint is made in good faith. And to me, that's the key word. If you go to your employer and in a mature adult manner, say what your concerns are, if you have some ideas or some suggestions, that's in good faith. But if you pick up the phone and you call OSHA to say, "My employer just did this to me," well, that's not good faith. OSHA says you have to talk to your employer first. You have to give them an opportunity to fix the hazard or to at least address it. So it's actually called the whistleblower protection on the website. So I want to talk briefly about what rights do you have under OSHA. I have this really interesting little YouTube video that I will show you, because this video was actually done by a group of youth, and they talk about, and they do an amazing job defining what your rights are under OSHA. Now granted, we're not all youth anymore, yet I firmly believe everything that they talk about applies to all workers and all employers. So what rights do you have under OSHA? This is a question on your handout that I so encourage you to follow along and write down what your rights are. You have a right to a safe and healthful workplace. You have a right to know what hazardous chemicals you're working with. I was an industrial painter. I worked with liquid copper, liquid nickel. I sprayed zinc on parts. I had no idea. I thought from the name that it might be nasty, but back then they didn't have safety data sheets. I was never trained on how to safely work with it, what gloves I needed to wear, what goggles I needed to wear. We have now a right to know what chemicals that we're working with and how to protect ourselves from any possible hazards. We have a right to obtain information about injuries and illnesses that have occurred in your workplace. Now, some of you may have heard of HIPAA, the Privacy Act for Healthcare. However, in industry, if a person is hurt at work, you have a right to know what happened and what, if anything, was the follow-up from that employer because of that injury. You have a right to training. I said in my last presentation, if some of you attended the Manufacturing 101, that I drove forklift without any training. How different can it be than driving a car, right? Wrong. There's big differences. And so training to not only how to drive a forklift, but training on how to safely operate an equipment, training on where do I go if there's a fire, what do I do if there's a tornado, training in am I allowed to use this fire extinguisher? Training in machine safeguarding. The list of training goes on, and for sometimes, I do agree, for smaller businesses, it can be burdensome, but it is your right to be trained in the safety that is related to the work where you are working. One of your other rights is a request, a hazard correction from your employer, a hazard exposure and medical records. In manufacturing especially, we would do air sampling studies to test how loud the noise was. We would test if there was any welding vapors that the employees were breathing in. So as an employee, they had a right to look at those reports. They had a right to participate in an OSHA inspection. Who wants to do that, right? Those were always days that my stomach was not happy with me. Yet, if OSHA comes to a facility, you have a right to go speak with them, to walk around the facility with them. But you also have a right to be free from retaliation for exercising your safety and health rights. And you do have a right to file a complaint with OSHA. The next slide is going to show you their website and the form and the phone number to use. However, I really encourage people, do that as the last resort. I encourage people, and so does OSHA, if you see something that's unsafe in your workplace, talk to your employer. Give them an opportunity to fix it. However, after a reasonable period of time, or if the hazard, you honestly believe someone could be killed, then and only then do you call OSHA. They don't always respond and come to the facility right away. There's a protocol that they follow with those complaints. Okay, so we've talked about your rights, but now I want to talk about your responsibilities. Once again, we are all adults, and we are responsible for our behavior and our choices that we make. So this next slide lists your responsibility. And I firmly believe there are 6 responsibilities that all adults need to follow. Number 1, that employer has trained you and told you the safety rules and policies. It's your responsibility to follow them. It's also your responsibility to wear any personal protective equipment that employer gives you to wear if they've trained you on how to safely wear it. And I can understand, those earplugs are uncomfortable. That hard hat falls off easily. Your hands sweat in those gloves. Those safety shoes, they pinch your toes sometimes, and they're heavy, right? But without that personal protective equipment, you may not go home with the vision to see your children, family member. You may not go home with toes to ride your bike, or my passion in the wintertime is cross-country skiing. So your responsibility, follow training, wear your PPE. Your third responsibility is to ask questions. And once again, as a new employee, I understand that that sometimes is a difficult thing to do. We don't want to make waves. We want to seem as though we know what we're doing. And yes, we know how to operate this piece of equipment, for an example. Yet it's a difficult yet a very important thing to do. Your fourth responsibility is to not take shortcuts. Several adults have worked in occupations where they're very experienced. So now, if you go to a new employer and you're like, I know how to do that, I've done that before, and if I do it this way, I know that it's going to be faster, probably make more parts, maybe I'll get to leave early. But don't take shortcuts. If you see a better way of doing a process, talk to that employer first, explain what you did in your last position, and maybe you will be able to save them some time or increase their productivity. However, if you take that shortcut, you may be injured. They may have that process in place for safety reasons. Your fifth responsibility is to report injuries. Some companies say, no matter how small, if you even need to get a Band-Aid, you need to tell your employer. So make sure that you ask your employers to say, you know what, if I need to go get a Band-Aid, do I need to write it down? Do I need to tell you? What is their policy? In our company, when I worked in the wood manufacturing, we would have employees, if they got a sliver in their hand, they wore gloves, but oftentimes slivers would get through their gloves. If they could not get that sliver out by the end of the day, I wanted to know about it as their safety manager. And the reason for that was some of those slivers, and we saw this happen, if they were in more than 24 hours, they could easily become infected. And you know, if they had a sliver, they can pull it out, looks good, put a Band-Aid on, no big deal. So ask your employer what type of injuries, because if you, and I'll use backs for an example, soft tissue injuries are the hardest. If you hurt your back at work and you think, oh, it's just old age, oh, it's just a hitch in my hip, and you don't tell your employer about it, and now 2 weeks later, your back is still hurting, you have numbness down your leg, and you think, maybe I should go to the doctor. And if you go to the doctor, if you haven't told the employer about it, you go to the doctor and you tell the doctor, I think this happened at work, your workers' comp may not cover that. So you're protecting yourself, but then you're also helping that employer. Going back to the back scenario, if it was something that was too heavy and you didn't have a device to lift it, if it was how a work center was set up, maybe they could improve it to minimize those hazards. So find out what's your company policy and always report injuries according to their policy. And then your last responsibility is to report job hazard. And that goes along with the shortcuts and asking questions. Talking about shortcuts, I want to tell you a true story. This happened in a manufacturing facility where 3 young women were getting close to the end of their shift, I believe, and I didn't talk with them personally, but I bet they were getting excited that they were almost done with work. They were operating a punch press. So each person was supposed to operate a press by themselves. They're supposed to take a part, put it in the machine, push the buttons on with their palms, because then their hands aren't going to get under there, right? Once they took their palms off, the machine stopped, they took the part off, put it in the box, and repeated that cycle. So put the part in, push the palms, take the part out. Pretty safe, right? Well, they decided they were going to take a shortcut. They were going to make this process go super fast. So one person put the part in, the other person pushed the palms. Put the part in, push the palm. Put the part in, push the palm. Put the part in, push the palms when that person's hand was still in there. Major amputation. Very, very young woman could not reattach the fingers because they were so hysterical after that happened. They ran to their car, drove to the hospital without even telling anyone. So I'm thinking, oh my goodness, the shortcuts that didn't report it, the job hazard, I'm hopefully that they were trained to that process. Everything that could have been done to have prevented that injury. This is a lifetime injury. This was that woman's dominant hand, and it was gone in a second. So to me, when I think of your responsibilities, when I think of people such as herself and the man who lost his fingers that were at my front door, you know, could they turn back time? Could they have made different choices and different decisions? Absolutely, they would have. So on your handout, question number 4 has you list your responsibilities. I encourage you to take a few minutes and write those down, because the information that I'm going to give you today will be a lot, and I really hope that that's one piece that you're going to take with you, especially to your first job. So I'm going to give you some very specific job hazards that OSHA lists on their website. The first job hazard is, they categorize it as a physical hazard. Anything at work that can hurt you. Well, that's kind of vague, right? That's pretty big. So when I think of a physical hazard, once again, I think of my background in manufacturing. So the machines that we operate, the forklifts that we drive, in construction, you know, it's the equipment that they operate. So the physical hazards. The next hazard that OSHA defines are chemical hazards. I told you I was a painter, right? I was exposed to a lot of chemicals. However, did you know that wood dust is also considered a hazardous, it's not a chemical, but that it's hazardous. If we breathe it in, it's not good for our lungs at specific quantities, and it's also combustible in large quantities in the environment. And also another chemical hazard they classify are vapors. If you're a welder and there's no ventilation, the vapors from that process can be very dangerous to your lungs and to your health. So some other examples are cleaning products, if your job requires you to do some janitorial responsibilities, paint vapors, we've already talked about. The last hazard that's on the OSHA website that I didn't even think about until I took on some safety responsibilities in my first job were biological hazards. What the heck is that, right? Well, if your job is working outside this summer, one of the biological hazards can be wood ticks. Wood ticks are known to cause some pretty nasty viruses. Also, how about those nasty bees? Some people are deathly allergic to bees. And also bacteria, viruses, people who work in the healthcare industry need to be very concerned about bloodborne pathogens. So those are just a few examples of biological hazards. any living thing that can cause sickness or disease. And of course, there's other health hazards that they have listed in their other category. Some examples of this are noise, radiation, repetitive movement. People who work at an office desk all day on keyboards, sitting at a computer, actually can be pretty tough on our bodies because of the repetitive nature of that. People who have to work in really, really hot environments, or on the other hand, like my husband, he works in a freezer for most of the day. He doesn't even wear gloves, right? He's like, I'm used to it. So thinking of anything else that is harmful that's not in those other three categories falls under this category. So one of the things that I want us to do as a group is I want you to look at these slides together, and I want you to jot down what hazards do you see in the pictures, and then also what are some possible solutions that you can think of. And I want you to keep in mind the hazards that we just talked about. So keep in mind the physical hazard. Is it a chemical hazard? Is it a biological hazard? Or remember the heat, the repetitive motion, and or noise. So our first picture that I'm bringing up is an office setting. The slide is of an administrative assistant. You can kind of tell this picture's a little dated because the woman is sitting at a desk with this huge monitor. Thankfully, I just got rid of my monitor like that at home. Yet, she is sitting, her posture is really bad. She's got her neck up like this, trying to look at her monitor. She has file drawers that are open. That's a physical hazard. Her posture is actually a repetitive stress hazard. She has an object that is hard to see at first, but it's a paper cutter, and the slicer is up. So look at some of the other hazards, jot them down, and the solutions for these are pretty simple. The next occupation that I am showing you is, I believe this is either a kitchen in a restaurant or maybe it's a warehouse, but it's a food warehouse. So I want you to look at what are some of the hazards in this picture, and also what are some solutions that you would have. One of the hazards that you may not see clearly is the young woman who's on her knee on the floor, and she has a box in front of her. What she has in her hand is a utility knife. Now, most of us have always heard with utility knives, cut away from you, right? Well, my youngest son did not get that memo, and he had a utility knife in his hand, pulled it towards him, impaled his abdomen the entire length of that utility knife. I have pictures of this injury. I'm going to put this to my slide. He was even afraid to call me. He did not want me to know that he just made a trip to the ER because of an injury that he caused himself. But this was at home. But if this would have happened at work, chances are, it would have been a workers' comp claim. He may have had to miss work. Who knows what it could have cost him and or the company. So look at this picture and see what other hazards that you can identify and also possible solutions. The next picture is of a kitchen. Now you can clearly see some of the hazards there. There's oil on the floor. This gentleman is lifting a box that's up over their head. You do that once a day, you'll be fine. But if you have to get that box down several times throughout a shift, different story. There is a hot kettle that's on the stove. Seems like it's boiling over. There's chemicals that aren't labeled. So look in that picture to see what other hazards that you can see and possible solutions. This next picture, I know it's not the best quality. However, in woodworking, so this is more like a construction site, what does this gentleman have his saw on? It's a ladder. He made a makeshift table out of a ladder. A big no-no. Saws such as that you see in this picture need to be mounted on an unmovable surface. And where's this guy's safety glasses? They're up on his head. I don't know about your mama, but my mama had eyes in the back of her head. This guy has them on the top of his head. Just kidding. But he has no gloves on, which he maybe should have a really snug fitting glove. To me, the biggest hazards are how that saw is set up and where his safety glasses are. The next picture I want you to take a look at is actually in a medical setting. And the biggest occupation that I can think of right now that is in such high demand is for certified nursing assistants. It's an amazing career. It's a 120-hour class to attend, that's it. And you can have a job probably the day that you finish. However, in nursing, in working in healthcare, just moving patients, that transferring of people from a bed to a wheelchair or from a wheelchair to their table so they could eat their meal. The picture that you're looking at, I'm sure that this could be a situation that may have been an emergency, and yet what are some of the solutions? You have two men lifting one woman, and they're both on the same side. Looks like a pretty simple fix. The other picture is of a healthcare person giving an injection. And once again, bloodborne pathogens is something that's extremely real, and needle punctures could result in hepatitis. So look at those and think about, so what could the healthcare do? Because they oftentimes have to give us shots. If you've been to the doctor recently or the next time you go, look at the device that they're using to draw your blood or to give you a shot. The new syringes, that needle retracts back into the syringe once they remove it, if they've purchased the safe kind. If they haven't, shame on them, because there's amazing tools that are out there that can prevent that. So to be honest with you, I don't want to freak you out or scare you about jobs, because every single job that we work at has possible hazards, has possible safety concerns. It's your right to know what those hazards are in your workplace, and it's your responsibility to follow the safety rules, to wear your PPE, and to follow your training. So we've talked about your rights and responsibility, but what about the employers? OSHA clearly defines the employer's responsibility. And their main responsibility is to provide you with a safe and a healthful work environment. And I know for small companies, for these mom and pop businesses that employ 2 to 5 employees, this is really a challenge to be in compliant with all of the standards. Yet there are resources through OSHA that can help these small companies. So it's their responsibility to provide training. Training is expensive. You're not producing when you're training, yet you will learn of the safety policies and the rules that are in place in that company. Some of the training has to occur every single year, such as how to use a fire extinguisher. Some training only has to occur when you very first start as a new employee. It's the employer's responsibility also to maintain a record-keeping system. It's called the OSHA 300 log, where they have to physically record any injuries or illnesses. That log has to be posted in the employee break room. Every year it has to be posted, I believe it's February, it has to stay up till April. Their other responsibility is within 8 hours, they have to report a fatality. Even if an employee would have a heart attack at their facility, they still have to call OSHA and tell them about that. Within 24 hours, they have to report an amputation, a loss of an eye, or even if one employee was hospitalized because of a work-related injury. It's their responsibility. And also, it's their responsibility to know the standards. And there seems like there's so many standards. This is the part that I firmly believe their website has done an amazing job helping employers learn the standards. When I first started safety, I'm aging myself, I know, the website wasn't even up. So I had to look through my books, my OSHA Bible, my safety Bible, to find this information. Oftentimes, I think it's written in a foreign language. It's like, thou shalt not do Made me crazy. So I was fortunate. My employer sent me to a lot of training. I went to the Minnesota Safety Council. I've done a lot of training at an OSHA training institute themselves. And now with the website, it is so much easier. There are a separate set of rules, and we've talked about this earlier, not only for general industry, and that includes like manufacturing, that includes retail, some not-for-profits. It also includes, there's also a separate standard for construction, a separate standard for agriculture, and separate set of standards for maritime. Whoa, some people have been very busy writing these standards. So I'm going to show you their website that lists the ones for general industry. It's General Industry 29 CFR 1910. On their website, and once again, this can be pretty daunting when you first look at their website that lists their standards. But anything you ever wanted to know, you can go to their search tab, type in, and I'll do an example of my lockout tagout story. So lockout tagout, and the lockout tagout information, the standard, the rules will come up. So as an employer, it's their responsibility to understand these standards, to read through them, to know what's required of them and what equipment they need to purchase, and then also to stay on top of any changes. What I also love about this web page is it's going to tell you what are the top 10 standards in general industry. The top 10 standards that are the most accessed. Bloodborne pathogens, believe it or not, is the #1 access standard. People from healthcare are trying to stay on top of all the changes and what's happening. The second one is hazardous communications. It's a standard that's just recently changed. It's changed throughout the course of a number of years. However, the final change just occurred June 1st. They used to be called material safety data sheets. Remember those? They're not called that anymore. They're safety data sheets. Before, you would look through these sheets to try to find information. Sometimes it would be on the front, sometimes it would be on the back. You couldn't find it half the time. Now they say the information that is on there has to be standardized. It has to have the same 12 sections, regardless if you're looking at a safety data sheet for floor paint or liquid copper. The layout of that safety data sheet has to be the same. Makes it so much easier. And they've also changed the labeling requirements on the chemicals themselves. So with their website, I really encourage you to spend some time looking up the different standards. And the other piece that I have found helpful, because of my training in safety, every 2 weeks I get an email from OSHA. And you can receive it also, anyone can. It's called their Quick Takes. And in that email, I get information on what's changed, what's hot, who's had a major injury, and then also it tells you which companies have been cited. And let me tell you, some citations have been huge. And if you think, well, so who's getting fined and what for? The information's on their website. You can check out employers if you want to. Yet to me, what's more important than that is to look at those standards, understanding the requirements, and what can you do as an employee to follow those rules and to help that employer provide you with a safe work environment. So we've talked about forklift. There's a standard for that. We've talked about first aid a little bit. OSHA says unless your company is within 4 minutes of a medical facility, they have to have people trained in first aid CPR. I don't care if the hospital's next door. I think it would take more than 4 minutes to get anyone next door to that doctor. It talks about hand and power tools. It talks about using step ladders. It talks about flammable and combustible liquids. So anything that you are working with, chances are it's listed in their standards. However, if there's no standard exist for a specific hazard, OSHA still has jurisdiction. and they call it their general duty clause. In their general duty clause, they say, and I'll read from the slide, each employer shall furnish a place of employment which is free from recognized hazards that is causing or is likely to cause death or serious physical harm to his employees, or her, a little sexist. With that general duty clause, the one hazard that it covers is ergonomics. There's no standard for ergonomics. They have tried several times to pass it. Congress, however, has not passed it, and I haven't even seen it come up for vote for a long time. And soft tissue injuries that can be prevented by ergonomics is covered under the general duty clause. So if you work for an employer and they are having a lot of carpal tunnel, strained backs, strained necks, there are many, many resources on their website that can help employers put together a good program. However, there's no specific ergonomic standard. So if you're an employer or you were a supervisor, you might want to say, so if OSHA comes knocking at my door, what do they typically fine employers for? The number one thing that they are fining employers for, and this is not only construction, it's also in general industry, is the lack of fall protection. Why is that, you might say? Well, it's the number one cause of death in the workplace. The second one is hazardous communications. The third is scaffolding. And the fourth is respiratory protection. Remember I said earlier that when I was a painter, I got this little respirator and made me look like a frog out of water? Well, no one trained me how to wear it. They didn't tell me how to store it. They didn't tell me how to replace the cartridges or when or if they needed to be replaced. So all of those things, thank goodness I was a young, healthy woman, that according to the respirator standard, that employer was supposed to have let me know. And also, with that standard now, if an employer gives you a respirator and says you have to wear it, according to the standard, that employer has to send you to the doctor for a medical evaluation before you wear that. And a doctor has to say, yes, they're healthy enough to wear it, or no, they cannot. Lots of requirements in some of these standards. And so the other one that's also on here that I have referred to earlier with my career was forklifts. However, forklifts, according to the OSHA standard, are not called forklifts. What? They're called powered industrial trucks, or PIT. So if you're reading through the OSHA Bible, and I do suggest if you suffer from insomnia, keep this book by your bed. It is a sure cure. And if you come to the chapter on PITs, it's not your underarms, it's forklifts. And it is actually the number 5 cited standard when OSHA comes knocking. So does OSHA come knocking on pretty regular basis? No. They don't have the staffing to do that. They prioritize where they send their inspectors. If it's a work environment where there is imminent danger, they will be there. And that just recently happened in our area. An OSHA inspector was just driving back to their office. They came across a job site where there were people up on a roof that did not have fall protection on. They stopped immediately and inspected that job site. OSHA's second priority is to inspect if there is a catastrophe or a fatality. Chances are they'll be there within 8 to 24 hours. Their third priority is employee complaints. And they do not inspect every complaint. They will follow up on it, but it will not bring an officer automatically to that workplace. And then programmed high hazards, we'll talk about that in a little bit. I'll define those high hazard places. And then also for follow-up. If OSHA's been to a facility and they have identified several situations of imminent danger, they will come back and verify that that employer has corrected those hazards. So you can find out about the OSHA standards, of course, in the OSHA books, on the internet, which is osha.gov. One piece that I feel that they've done an amazing job. But OSHA really is a lot more than just a set of standards. OSHA focuses on industry that has changed, that's new, that they've identified recent hazard alerts. One example in our area is all of the sand mining. For anyone who lives in Barron County or Chippewa County, all of the mining that has been occurring with the frac sand, the sand that's used, I should say, for the fracking process, when you're doing the mining and processing that sand, in the air is silica. And silica can cause silicosis, which is a form of lung cancer. So OSHA has worked closely with those employers to minimize the exposure to their employees. Another one of their national emphasis programs is nursing homes and residential care facilities. Because of, this may surprise you, in a lot of nursing homes that focus that their care is for people with dementia or Alzheimer's, violence in the workplace because of those patients, they really do not know that they have struck out and hurt someone, yet it can happen. The other hazard in nursing homes is actually the ergonomics, the possible back injuries and the strains. Nurses especially, are on their feet 8 and sometimes 12 hours a day. So OSHA is really working with nursing homes and residential care facilities to minimize hazards. What can they put in place to help reduce those injuries? The other injuries that they're seeing in nursing homes are the bloodborne pathogens that we talked about earlier. And so the importance of nursing homes having a good safety program in place, and that they work with all of their employees to ensure that they know the policies and how to implement them. The other OSHA resource that I talked about earlier was the OSHA booklets, the pamphlets, and every publication that they make is free and available to you from their website. They have fact sheets. They actually have an amazing program called a consultation program. Remember, I said, I understand how difficult it is for smaller businesses to put in place all of the safety standards that relate to that business. Well, they have a program where at no cost at all to that smaller employer, they will come to that employer's facility and they will help them evaluate their hazards. They will help them write their programs, evaluate their programs. They'll look at the injuries that you've had. When I was in charge of safety, I had a consultant come on site. It was an amazing free service. And I understand that some employers, that makes them a little nervous, thinking, what? You're asking OSHA to come? Are you crazy? These are the good guys. Their consultation program is there to help you. The only time that will result in a fine is if that consultant identifies a hazard and the employer doesn't fix it. Well, if you've asked them in, chances are they're going to fix it. And then they also have posters that are required. And I'll show you their new poster in a couple of more slides, because this is just one of their recent changes. So I've talked about the booklets, the posters, the training materials. However, the other cool thing that they have done is all of their materials is available in multiple languages. The slide that you currently see, I don't understand a word that's on there. However, if I spoke Spanish, I would. And so I really believe they've done an excellent job trying to get information out to employers in different languages. The next slide says it in English. It's a picture of this man, and he says, I worked construction for 10 years before my fall. It shattered my body and my livelihood. Work safely, use the right equipment. So this next slide is showing you their new poster. This poster is required by law at each place of work. It needs to be in an area where people will see it. And I need to be honest with you. I bet if I did a poll and you were honest to me, most people have seen this poster. Several have read it. However, today you have heard all the material that's on that poster. That poster talks about your rights and the employer's responsibilities. So this one is brand new. It was passed and required by July 1st. So a quick review, and these are on your handout, so I encourage you to follow along and jot down your answers. So my first question to you is, when was OSHA first enacted? What year? And what was the purpose? It was first enacted in 1970, and the purpose was to save lives. Who's covered under the OSHA Act is our second question. Well, the answer is all employers in the United States that have paid employees that work for them. Remember, there are separate acts for construction and for general industry and for agriculture. The third question on your handout is, what rights do you have under OSHA? Well, we talked about quite a few, and I don't expect that you'll remember them all. Yet the most important one, I believe, is that you have a right to a safe and healthful work environment. Your fourth question on your handout is, what responsibilities do you have under OSHA? It is so easy to say, oh, the employer should do that. Oh, they should buy me that. They should get this. Yet as adults, we have responsibilities. So your responsibility under OSHA is to follow the safety training, to wear your personal protective equipment, to not take shortcuts, to report all injuries, and to ask questions. I may have missed one, yet I think we've got close to the 6 that we talked about earlier. So what responsibilities does your employer have? That's your 5th question. The list seems a little bit smaller for your employers, yet it is extremely important. It's their responsibility to know those OSHA standards and to train you and to provide you with a safe work environment. If a standard does not exist, what can OSHA use for citations? If you wrote down general duty clause, you were correct. Remember I said ergonomics, the science of our workplaces and how to make our work environment to reduce lifting, bending, stooping, repetitive motion. There's not an OSHA standard for that. And if an employer has numerous ergonomic related injuries, they can be cited under that general duty clause. So, question number 7. Where do you go to find more information about OSHA? Well, to me, if you don't have the internet at home, I so encourage you to use ours at the job center or at the library, because the internet, OSHA.gov, G-O-V, is the best place to go. It is very well laid out, very easy to use website, or you could get the OSHA standards. I'm sure you could even order them as a book from your library, and it's not as easy to read as their website, yet all of the information will be in their books as well. On their website, they update that information as soon as any changes are made, whereas if you purchase the books, it's really difficult to stay on top of the changes. Well, this presentation, Safety in the Workplace, we focused on safety hazards, biological hazards, chemical hazards. We talked about your rights. We talked about the employer's responsibilities. I even shared with you a couple of injuries that I have been aware of. Why did I become so interested in safety? Well, yes, it was my background in manufacturing. Yet, I really know that in my personal life, that when I go to work, I want to come home every day to my family, to my grandchildren. I want to be able to go out there, ride my bike, and do cross-country skiing. And so to me, having a safety program in place is critical to help us not only at work, but yet also in your personal lives as well. So thank you for attending today's workshop. If you have any questions or concerns, please talk to them at your job center, and they can contact myself and I will get back with you. Have a nice day, and I hope you stick around for the next workshop. Thank you very much.